So what I just put on the chat, there's a series of links that I put together. These are all part of the Digital Futures project, where we have this a bunch of we've got a YouTube site where all the events happen, and they're useful because they follow up what I'm saying in more detail. So I think those would be. It's a resource that we do. Every Saturday we have an event. It's at 10 o'clock in the morning Eastern time, and we have presentations, and some of them are pretty amazing. The student works, and also some leading practitioners, and occasionally people like Mediterranean digital things. We're doing a session on space architecture. We're doing something on the Amazon and so on. So, but it's a resource that's there and actually quite useful.
Okay, that's fantastic. I appreciate you sharing that. And for all the students that are on right now, I will take all of those links and I'll paste them into the into today's summary for today's class. Looks like we're still waiting for a couple more, but I'm going to go ahead. Number one, in order to be respectful of Neil's time and try to keep us on track here. And Neil, I'll just give you a little bit of an introduction to what we're doing here.
Okay.
Like I said, this is the Ball State College of Architecture and Planning, the ARCH program, and we're based in, this cohort is based in Indianapolis. This is the pro practice class, and I've assigned a semester project where they have to come up with an idea, put together a business plan and pitch it. Essentially, we'll have our own Shark Tank or our own pitch to VCs at the end of the semester. I gave them the option. They can do it individually. They can team up in small groups if they like, or they could lobby the entire class to do a single project, and they didn't do that. So, so it's a mix of individuals and small groups that are going about the project. And like I told them, I don't care if your idea is an architecture firm or if it's an app. It doesn't matter. Come up with the idea, what's the big idea? Who does it serve? All those things. What's the business plan? And pitch it at the end. And so the other thing that we do every week is there are teams that are assigned to come up with the speakers for the week, and I always say, who do you want, and I'll help you connect with those people, et cetera, which is how we ended up connecting. And tonight's team wanted you, so I appreciate you joining us this evening, all the way from Venice Beach in California. And with that, I think we may as well. Let's see, 2, 8. Okay, so we're close, and we're 6 after. So I'm gonna go out and check on Canvas to make sure no one's having trouble getting in. But guys, why don't you go ahead and do your introduction of Neil, and then Neil's got a great presentation on AI and architecture that relates to the digital futures. And then once Neil goes through that, I'm sure you're going to have questions. And so, just take your questions from there. And like I always say, ask the questions that are going to help you learn whatever it is that you want to learn from Neil. So, so go ahead with your introduction, and I'm going to see if anybody is having trouble getting to the meeting, and I'm going to mute myself from here. So go for it.
Okay, so I'll introduce Neil. So Neil Leach is an architect, curator, and writer. I'm currently visiting professor at Harvard University GSD, professor at the European Graduate School, Feng professor at Tongji University, and adjunct professor at USC. He's also taught around the world at several different universities. His research goes into fields of critical theory and digital design. He's published a number of volumes and articles and books dealing largely with the impact of theoretical tools and from critical theory into an architectural arena, and also has done work in the field of digital design, and is currently completing a new work focused on AI and architecture. So, little blurb, you can expand upon that as you see fit. I was interested and bringing you on due to the space architecture work you did with some students at an undergraduate level. I can't remember what I saw that for.
Yeah, actually, it is an AD, architectural design issue, 2015 on space architecture. And I was involved in a NASA project developing a 3D printer for the moon and Mars before that. Actually, right, also, the description was slightly out of date. I have to go and update whatever's online because I'm now no longer, I was at GSD, then I moved down to FIU in Miami, even though I'm not there right now, to lock into the tenure logic. So anyway, so not that it matters too much. But I would say that probably the most important thing I do now is this thing called Digital Futures, which is a weekly event now, but in the summer, we set it up, and it was something that used to happen in Shanghai, physically in Shanghai, every summer, a free workshop. And then this year, we went online, and it kind of exploded. There are about 12,000 students applied to go on this thing all over the world, literally all over the world. And we had 80 workshops, 12 of them looking at AI. Anyway, the legacy of that is now that every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock, we have an event, which is, I put on the link there, Digital Futures, which is for free. So it's actually a resource that I think could be useful, especially for those in schools where they have very crusty professors who are still talking about Le Corbusier or whatever else. So, I mean, it's there, it's available. Yeah. So shall I just go ahead and share my screen? Okay. Okay, so yeah. So what I want to do today is talk about something that that I'm interested in as part of the future. I just as a kind of comment, I do think that many schools of architecture are still locked into the past. You know, I think that we should be architects. We should be thinking about the future. Potentially every design that we make could be built in the future. But I find most schools of architecture deeply nostalgic. They have lots of courses in history, but nothing about the future, futurology, and so on. And so Digital Futures, many of the titles of what the books we publish, and in fact the whole organization, is about the future. So I want to show you something that is going to hit you and your future, and you guys are really the ones to whom it relates most of all. Not only because you're the creatures of Facebook and so on, and that generation that uses apps on the iPhone that are all controlled by AI. I mean, it's everywhere in your lives, right? But also because this is going to hit the architectural profession right at the kind of high point of your career. I mean, it's going to progressively hit. It's already hitting it, but it's going to be the point where it's actually going to have a huge impact on you. So, and the other reason why I want to talk about is it's something that I feel quite passionate about. I think it's something that's going to really inject something new into architecture. I'm just going to show you an example here of something that was produced using what's called GANs, Generative Adversarial Networks. Cycle GAN is the full name for this one, which is a kind of combination of the Sagrada Familia interior in Barcelona by Gaudi and a walk through the forest, which is kind of paired up, and it's hallucinating this kind of image. And this is a kind of example of precisely what it can do. And I'd say, you know, I studied at Cambridge in England, and I finished I went into an office in 1988, and I've got to say at the time, I mean, I'd gone into school to study architecture because I'd seen the Sydney Opera House, and I'd seen pictures of the Sydney Opera House, and I thought, that's what I want to do. That's what I want to do, something amazing like that. And it was a time when we were kind of stuck in postmodernism, and it was, I think, a real crisis in terms of architecture. And what's happened since then? So then in 1988 was also the year of deconstructivism, call it what you want, when people like Zaha and Rem Koolhaas and Peter Eisenman, Frank Gehry, and so on started producing something that that's what I thought, that's architecture. So at last I saw something, and now I see something happening, which is, I think, of the same kind of burst of formal invention that my students get absolutely kind of caught up in. They're absolutely obsessed. We do this in the studio. they're amazed by it. I give theory classes about this, and 90%, maybe 95% of my students write about AI. They just think it's the thing that's going to hit them, and it's the most fascinating topic. As a theorist, I also think it's kind of important because it engages with questions like consciousness, deep philosophical questions, and so on. But I won't go into that now. So anyway, it's something I think you guys need to know about, and I hope in some way I can get across to you why I think this is so special. Let me just say a few words. What I want to do is just take you, this is a brief introduction, nothing more than that. The links I've given you, they will give you further information about this. But I want to just say, this is the moment, I think, when I realized what the impact of AI. I was boarding a plane in LAX to go to Shanghai. And you know how it is, you normally have you on your phone or something, or you've got a boarding pass and you show it to the flight attendant and they kind of scan it and whatever. This time, and this was only about 2 years ago, the flight attendant said, no, I don't want that, just look at this screen. I looked at this screen and it recognized who I was, and it told me my seat assignment. At that point, I thought, holy shit, this is both amazing and terrifying. It's amazing that it recognized me out of everyone on the planet. It recognized me out of everyone on the planet, but it terrified me for exactly the same reason. It recognized me out of everyone on the planet. So, at the time I was working, and I was in Shanghai working on this book, and at the end of my 2-month period there, literally the last day, I thought, it's very difficult because this is a really problematic thing. I feel like Elon Musk in a way. On the one hand, Elon Musk is telling you he's working with this on Tesla and so on. At the same time, he's telling us it's a threat to humanity. So my next step, the book I was doing, I got my publishers to agree to make it into 2 different volumes. So this is the one I just finished, and it'll come out in about 3 or 4 months' time. It's, I think, possibly the first book on AI. It's an introduction to AI, and it's got a white cover because it's like the angel, the good side of AI. On the front here is an image that's generated by AI. I'll talk more about that in a moment. And this is the second one. In fact, the first one, I wanted to call it Alexa Design My Building. They thought that was a bit kind of crude, a bit commercial in some way. But the point is that's going to happen very soon. You're going to be able to say, Alexa, design my building, which is going to be amazing. It'll just design it for you. And I will show some automatically generated designs today. But at the same time, what does that mean? It basically means this. It means it's the death of the architect. And you guys should know this. You need to know this. It's going to have a huge impact on the profession. There's absolutely no question about it. And my research has only reinforced that view. So it's both good and bad. And anyway, I'll talk about the good side today. I just want to just give you, to begin with, just a brief overview about what AI is. First of all, it's not this. This is not what it's going to be like working in the office of the future. It's not going to be android robots surrounding you. In fact, you're not even going to see AI at all. It's around you all the time. It's recognizing your friends on Facebook. It's categorizing images on Instagram. It's stopping your spam. It's doing all these things when you're driving. You veer out of lane. It's warning you. It's everywhere all the time. You are absolutely, completely surrounded by AI, but it's completely invisible. Completely invisible. And it's going to be through your cell phone in particular that you are going to be connecting through the cloud to vast GPU resources that are going to allow you to operate in a new way. And it's going to, so it's actually, just to go back, so it's going to be not so much, to begin with, not so much humans versus AI, but AI as an extension, a kind of prosthetic extension of the human imagination. They talk about it in terms of extended intelligence. That's the way it's going to operate. It's going to be an assistant in some ways. Also, to some extent, a muse, kind of throwing up possible suggestions and so on. So just to briefly say, there's a huge difference between what we call human intelligence and AI. Even though they use the same terms, the brain is made up of neurons and synapses, and they're the same terms that they use for deep learning, for connectionism, which is a type of AI that's modeled on the brain. But there's really not much connection. It's loosely inspired by the brain. At the same time, it's completely different to the brain. At the same time, what is most interesting about what's happening is actually we're finding out about how the brain operates, how we think. And in the end, what I'd say is that people interested in AI are not interested in artificial intelligence. They're in fact interested in intelligence itself. And I'd also say that human intelligence is only a sub-branch of that. And there are limits to human intelligence, but AI is going to go way beyond that. So, but the huge difference between human intelligence and AI is that AI doesn't have consciousness. It doesn't know what it's doing. It can beat Garry Kasparov at chess or Lisa Doll at Go. It doesn't even know it's playing those things. Is that important? That's another question. So the other thing about AI that I think is a bit confusing is people use the term, and the term's been around since the 1950s, but there are many different types of AI. And this diagram where you see you get kind of nested inside of each other. Deep learning is a sub-branch of machine learning, is a sub-branch of AI. The broader category has been around for 50 or 60, 70 years. What's happening now is basically deep learning. That's the cutting edge thing. It's part of AI, but the difference is absolutely huge. It's like comparing the very first car before even when they were called horse-drawn, what they call so a Model T Ford, or even before that. Okay, really early car, and compare that to a Tesla. That's the difference. There's an absolutely huge difference. The term is used, but what's happening is so vastly different to these things. What I want to do is then is look at today to show examples of what it can do in terms of being creative, or what it can generate. I mean, the big question is, can you say something is creative when it doesn't know it's being creative because it doesn't have consciousness? In any case, I will show you something pretty astonishing, I think. And the general view, I guess, this is a Japanese computational architect called Makoto Watanabe. The general view about computers is that they're just mechanical things. Human beings have dreams, but computers just do what they're told to do. They don't come up with anything new. People are the only ones who can create an image that does not yet exist. Machines do not have dreams. All I want to do today is to prove that's wrong. Okay, that's what I want to do. And I want to start, I mean, just by commenting on this. It's a game of Go. Now, none of us play Go, right? Well, maybe you do. But Go is, so in 1997, an IBM computer beat Garry Kasparov at chess. And that was kind of easy. Go is infinitely more complicated. There are more moves in Go than there are atoms in the universe. It is an incredibly complicated and advanced game. And this is AlphaGo, which is a computer developed by DeepMind, a company in the UK, in London, that has now been acquired by Google, so it's part of Google, taking on Lee Sedol, who was one of the top Go players in the world. Now, what is interesting about this game, apart from the fact that it beat Lee Sedol, and at that point in China and Korea, where this is their national game, they thought, holy shit, this is their Sputnik moment. They thought, we've got to get involved in this technology because it is so amazing. So it had a major impact. There's a huge competition now with AI. Putin kind of has made the comment that whoever rules AI rules the world. And there's intense competition, especially in China. Huge competition. But there was one moment in this game, just one move, that absolutely changed the game of Go and changed people's attitudes towards AI. And it was a move in game 2. There were 5 games. At least it all won one, and then the AI won all the other ones. But in game 2, there was one particular move, number 37, move 37, that has gone down in history as being astonishing. Because the computer was kind of playing up a little bit, and it was making all these moves that didn't make sense. All the experts said that. They were calling them slack moves. They couldn't understand why the computer had done this. And then eventually they found out, because they were not slack moves. They weren't mistakes. And this move was made by the computer, never been made before ever in any game of Go. And so everyone thought it was a mistake. Leach Anadol starts to smile, and then the smile drains from his face, and he realizes what a brilliant move it was. Never before thought about, and it's changed the game of Go ever since. So here are some comments he made. Yesterday I was surprised, but today I am speechless. And he makes this comment that I think, I don't think that human beings are so creative, by the way. I really don't think we're very creative. We kind of, if you do a project in the studio, right? If you do something that looks like a pineapple, you'll get failed. If you do something that's a little bit like Rem Koolhaas or Zaha Hadid or whatever, but slightly different, that's architecture. In other words, you're kind of copying in some way or following in the traces of other people. So I don't think we're so creative. And anyway, AlphaGo, this is a comment from Leach Anadol, showed us that moves humans may have thought are creative were actually conventional. And that relates to architecture, because that's exactly what they found using AI in architecture, that AI comes up with things that are just beyond what we could have imagined. And this is where they started doing research in what is called GANs, Creative Adversarial Networks, looking at faces. And these are all faces that have just been generated by the computer. So that comment that Watanabe made about computers can't come up with something that doesn't already exist is completely wrong. These are all generated by AI, and they're of people that don't actually exist. So this was the initial area of research they started doing, looking at faces. And there was a series of, they progressively developed these techniques until we got to the most recent one, was StyleGAN, it's not so recent anymore, which is just astonishing. Every single one of these faces is generated by the computer immediately. And there's a website you could go to called thispersondoesnotexist.com, and you can do the same. Every time you refresh your browser, it generates a face of someone who doesn't exist, but pretty convincing. You should try that out yourself, right? So these are just examples that a year or so ago I took of going to that website and just generating faces. All of these faces are hallucinated. That's the term that's used. They're hallucinated by the computer. They don't exist as such. So in terms of the visual arts, it was really, one thing I should stress is AI operates, or at least these GANs operate in 2D. So the world of painting is more advanced than architecture, and they started producing this stuff before we did. 2018 was really the breakthrough moment. There was an auction in London where they sold a painting that was generated by AI, this one by a group called Obvious from Paris. And I think the same year, Mario Klingman, who is an AI artist, won a big art prize, the Lumen Prize, on an AI-generated artwork. And actually, frankly, the stuff that you can produce on AI is pretty astonishing. It's not bad at all. And then I think the first incursion came with Refik Anadol, who's a media artist based in LA. He's given lectures in many schools of architecture now because his work uses architecture. It's the material he uses, the data is architectural, and he projects onto buildings. That's really where he started making his name. This is the Frank Gehry's Walt Disney Opera House in LA, and this is a projection of his onto it, which he refers to as dreaming, which is kind of interesting in a way because of the comment about dreams earlier on. And what he does. So let me just say that 2019, I proposed to curate the British Pavilion of the Venice Biennale, and I teamed up with Zaha Hadid Architects and with Google, which I thought was a dream team. I mean, an amazing architectural practice with the support of Google, one of the great giants of high tech. And we got nowhere. We didn't even get on the shortlist. The shortlist wasn't that short. It was 7 people. We were not even on it. And which is interesting because there's some opposition, presumably in London, to AI. But what we were proposing was basically this. We were going to hallucinate Zaha buildings, and least that's what I was proposing. And actually, well, the Venice Biennale was, of course, delayed. It was meant to happen in May of this year, and I don't know when it's going to happen at all, if it's going to happen at all now. But the point is that Refik was already doing this. Refik produced this, I think, in December or something. He was already doing this. And what he basically doing is taking all the images of all the buildings by Zaha and uploading them into a computer. And we're talking about thousands and thousands. Typically, for deep learning, you want 5,000 at least images. And then it just hallucinates based on that. And it's interpolating and generating possible buildings out of this. It's kind of navigating a certain search space, and it's generating something. And much of it is kind of nonsense. You know, you think, well, so what? But occasionally you'll get some moments and you think, holy shit, this is incredible. This is amazing. This is kind of, I mean, Zaha might be dead, but you can still create Zaha, right? And so anyway, so this was the first incursion was really made in the world of media art. Refik Anadol is incredible. You should check out his website. There's also, I think I gave you a link to a discussion, panel discussion, AI and architecture, AI and neuroscience, where he talks to a neuroscientist about this. That's also interesting from a theoretical point of view, how you can see, you can use neuroscience to understand what's going on. But just hold on here, because very soon you're going to see an image that is complete Zaha. There you go. Okay, and that's the image that is on the front cover of the book. So something is happening, and within architecture, I'm skipping a lot because there aren't that many people working on this. But this is with someone who was a colleague of mine at FIU as a visiting professor. Now he's at FAU, that's Florida Atlantic University in Fort Lauderdale, and he used to work for Co-Organizer. He comes from Romania. Actually, I gave a lecture in Romania about 10, 15 years ago or something. I don't exactly know when. And he was there in the audience, and I was showing what we were doing at the AA at the time. And he thought, okay, I want to do some of this. And actually, he's now one of the greatest geniuses. He's also part of our Digital Futures team, an amazing guy. And Daniel Bolojan has been working for Co-Organizer. And if you look at the link with the discussion between Tom Main of Morphosis, who's a Pritzker Prize winner, and Wolf Prix of Morphosis, of Co-Organizer, you will see this. This is basically what's called Deep Himmelblau. Deep Himmelblau is, again, uploaded all the Co-Organizer buildings, and then this is a kind of cycle GAN similar to the Gaudi image that I showed you early on, which is also done by Daniel Bolojan. And this is the kind of stuff that has been hallucinated by the computer. And I mean, in some ways, it's imprecise. It's also only 2D, even though it looks like it's 3D. But at the same time, and this is the thing, this is the moment, I think, when Wolf Prix got so excited, because all of a sudden, this is something that is completely fantasized by the computer, that's coming out of the computer, based on AI, and he was just jumping up and down in the studio and saying, this is it, this is it, this is the way forward. And that's why, also in this discussion, there's this discussion, one of the video links is to this discussion between Tom Main and Co-Organizer. Tom Main is fascinated by this as well. I mean, LA is a big place for this. Refik Anadol is based in LA. SciArc are doing a lot of work in LA based on this. And media artists at UCLA are doing a lot of work, and so on. So and then the office itself. So this is a guy called Stanislav Chailu, who was a GSD graduate. I think he was there after I was teaching at the GSD. And he developed what he called ARCH620, which is a way of operating. I mean, the thing about architecture, you do operate in 2D, right? Plan sections, elevations are 2D, so you can use this as a way of kind of developing it. And this is what he did as a student. And they're kind of nested above each other, so you can, as you change things, everything changes, the furniture arrangement and so on changes. So he's just been exploring this, and he's now working for this company called Spacemaker AI, who are one of the two firms that are producing AI for the office. And another link that I had, and you can see Daniel Bolojan at the top here, this is Christian from Spacemaker AI is Maria, and then Wan Yu He. I'll talk about her in a moment. We had this discussion. Now, the reason why I think AI is going to be important is not because you can do those kind of crazy videos things. Not at all. I mean, that's a fad, okay? I mean, my students get blown away by this thing. They just, even the bad students are producing incredible designs doing that, but that's just a fad. The reason why it's going to be so important is because of something that Håvard Håkland said in this discussion. And he said this: what's happening is that clients are beginning to insist that architects use their product, their AI product. And the reason why clients are going to insisting on that is because you can get the optimal solution. If you've got a site, how do you make the most of the site? And if you're designing a building, how do you get that building to perform environmentally and so on in a way that is going to be the most efficient possible? And basically, AI does that for you. It tells you how you can exploit your site and how you can do this. So clients are going to insist on that. That's the bottom line. And I'm convinced that's going to be the game changer, not the funky stuff. That's going to be the game changer. And what's going to happen, it's going to be very similar to the way people treat LEED certification and sustainability these days. They want to brand themselves by competing. I am more sustainable than you are. It's going to happen with AI. I am using AI more than you are, and so on. That is, to my mind, the reason why AI is going to be a game changer, not because you can do funky things with it, because clients are going to insist, and so on. So the other person who is very significant, I mentioned that there was sort of competition between China, after that game of Go with Lee Sedol. That's a nation whose national game is not chess, it's Go. And they suddenly realized, and the explosion of interest in AI in China is astonishing. I mean, I've got a professorship in Shanghai, and we run workshops on AI. We had 12 workshops this summer on AI, and everybody is totally obsessed there. And Wan Yu, she's Chinese. She studied in the Berlage in Rotterdam, and then she worked for OMA. And the practice she's got, X-Cool, which is it's a startup in Shenzhen dedicated to making AI for architecture. X-Cool means there are two things. One, X-Coolhaus, she was working for OMA. And secondly, X-Cool, according to the Urban Dictionary, means super cool. It's the coolest thing you can get. And in some ways, well, what you do is basically you use this thing, you use your phone, and you go through the cloud, and you can connect and do all these things. That's the way that it's going to begin to operate. Obviously, you use larger computers as well. And it's really taking off. And much of the stuff they do is for developers. It's not terribly exciting architecturally because that's the data they're using. And the developers are the ones who want to maximize the site. And this is the first completed project that was done using AI. And really, there's not much that's completed yet at all, but it's going to be there. And so I guess you could sort of see them as being like the Elon Musks of China and Shenzhen. And you can also test out the performance of the building, do studies on environmental things. And then this, which is, I showed you that image of the style GANs where faces were just mutating and changing from one to another. This is the architectural version of this. They had actually a site, this building does not exist until they took it down because it was too expensive in terms of computational resources. But this is something, this is a building that's been hallucinated by AI. Now, that's amazing, but that's not the thing that's going to change things. It's going to be the fact that clients are going to insist on this, and that's why AI is going to be, to my mind, the future. These are some of the images coming out. They're not terribly good just yet, but what happens is that because it's deep learning, it improves with time. And anyone who's been using a translation app will know that translations have got better and better and better because they improve over time. And I guess the rest is history. This is the kind of drawings you can produce with it. And finally, let me just simply say this, is that I've just given you an overview of some of the material in my book, which is probably one of the first, I don't know if it's the first one, on AI and architecture, introduction to it. But if you want to find out about how you do this book on the right-hand side, Generative Deep Learning, shows you the techniques. I'm not a technical person I'm interested in the theories of technology, but I don't teach that. I work with Daniel Bolojan mainly most of the time. the book on the right can tell you how to use GANs to generate this kind of stuff. And also, if you go to Digital Futures site, you'll get a lot of information about it, including our Discord site, where a lot of people are kind of contributing to it about how you can find out about it and so on and so on. It's out there. And on the left-hand side, I think the best general book on AI by Melanie Mitchell, really easy to read, a guide for thinking humans, but it's not about architecture. It's not even about GANs. It doesn't show, but it does give you an insight by someone super smart into what is going on. So that's just an overview. And I don't know if any of you have heard about AI and architecture before, but you damn well should know about it, because it's going to be a game changer. And you are the guys who are going to be exposed to it, both in a positive way and a negative way. It is going to open up lots of possibilities. At the same time, frankly, it's going to take your jobs away. One of the comments made by the Spacemaker guys said that they say basically, those who know how to use AI will replace those who don't know how to use AI. I'm convinced of that. I'm absolutely convinced of that. But I'm also convinced that ultimately, I mean, you guys use Spotify, right? And all these apps that have got AI-based things. And Spotify knows what music you like. Well, it's not going to be long before computers are going to produce buildings that you like. And it will know what you like. I mean, you already can see with Gmail, it finishes your sentences because it knows how you normally write. Well, this is what's going to happen. And very soon, you're literally going to be able to say to your computer, Alexa, design my building. And it will generate something like this. So it's both good and bad. But from your point of view, I think that you at least should be aware of this. And if there's one thing that you've got to design, it's not buildings, it's your future. You've got to design your future, and you've got to know that this is on the horizon, and it's going to come across, and it is a game changer, absolute game changer. It is going to change everything in architecture, and a lot of architects, frankly, are going to be unemployed. It's a profession that's already struggling, and it's going to go struggle even further because of this. At the same time, it's going to open up lots of possibilities for those who are engaging with it. So my advice to you is to find out about it. I don't know when you graduate, but I would really invest in finding out about AI and what it's going to do to you. So I've given you some links there that gives the YouTube panel discussions we had, and follow that up. And I mean, you don't have to follow what I'm saying, okay? I just think I'm blown away by this, okay? I'm really blown away by this, and it's up to you. Yeah. Okay, that's it.
That's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. And for those of you that came in a few minutes after we started, at the beginning, I guess it's probably still in chat, Neil shared some links. I will paste those links into our summary page for today's class, so we'll have those. And beyond that, what questions do you guys have for Neil?
We've got a couple from the group written down here. So do you see the AI technology being used more in like the actual production of like construction drawings, et cetera, like a traditional firm uses? Or do you see it more in like a data collection, like client pattern recognition type use case?
Well, I don't know about client pattern recognition, but certainly it is. So the way that they're seeing it at the moment is that it's going to be, they're talking about AI assist, okay? AI assist in the sense that it's something that you partly control. I mean, a bit like that thing I showed you, the Stanislas Chalu stuff, the ARCH620, where he was controlling things. And so to begin with, you're going to be partly in control of it. And maybe for some time it's going to be the case. So it's simply an assistant. You can allow you to do these drawings. But just one thing I should say, just in terms of let's say, construction, I think one thing you should realize is AI doesn't construct anything. In fact, the digital doesn't construct anything at all. There's a kind of myth out there. I mean, I've even got a book that I titled it Digital Fabrication. There is no such thing as digital fabrication, right? All forms of fabrication are analog. You know, you've got a CNC milling machine. When it does what it does, that's completely analog. You're working with analog materials. all the digital is doing is controlling the toolpath and so on. So in terms of AI, it's not going to be in constructing things. It's going to be in terms of the construction side. Obviously, you can control robots using AI, and that's where it's going to come in. It's also going to give you sort of kind of like just as I was reminded about this Zoom session. It's going to kind of give you it's going to prompts. It's going to give you prompts, especially in the domain of things like risk management and so on. They're talking about that, how it's going to be important. So yeah, it's I mean, actually, it's already there in a lot of the tools that you have. It's been embedded in those things, but increasingly, it's going to be there for the generation of drawings. But you're going to be in charge of that to begin with. Eventually, it's going to know what you want. I mean, like Gmail knows what your sentence is going to be, it's going to design it for you, right? Yeah.
Okay. Another one, in one of your examples, you had like developers seem to be on the forefront of this with like space utilization. So what do you think like some of the other customers, like what sectors of architecture are going to, I guess, get the most out of AI usage?
Yeah, just one thing I didn't say, but I meant to say. One of the examples of SpaceMaker AI, the guys that they're working for developers, it came up with a move. The computer came up with a solution that was completely counterintuitive. I mean, a bit like that game of Go. They thought, what a stupid move, right? But the point is that the move made complete sense. I mean, the architectural move. So in some ways, if you think about developers, it's a bit more like a game of Go or a game of chess. They're not worried about aesthetics so much. They're more about strategic moves and how can you exploit the maximum possibility out of sight and so on. So that's where it's going to come in for them. I think that increasingly, it's going to be some kind of muse that's going to generate lots of other possibilities suggestively. I think for you guys in the studio, it's going to produce all this kind of weird hallucinatory kind of stuff. When I showed this to Tom Main, he said, well, what do I do with that? I need to control these things. I'm an architect, So in some ways, there are two domains. One is the kind of artistic experimentation that's going to be crazy. It's going to produce the most astonishing, weird things. And then there's the practicalities of the site itself. So I think those are the two primary areas of development, of its potential, rather. Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Do you see the profession as a whole starting to adopt this, or are there going to be some potential sticks in the mud still being able to stick to their traditional models? And also, will AI eventually just automate out some of the more grunt work positions as you see in other like industries like driving, etc.?
Let me just go to the first question first. So I studied at Cambridge, right? And right at the time when computers were appearing, and I had some professors who banned the computer from the studio. They said, we're not having computers. They produced a graduating class that were unemployable, absolutely unemployable. You have to be able to use a computer now in this thing. And I think the same thing's going to happen. There is going to be some resistance, of course. Some of those Swiss guys, they're going to hate it. Of course, they're going to be haters. But frankly, it is everywhere now, and it's a tide. You can't stop that tide. So it's going to become indispensable. It already is. We're already using it in a way we don't realize it, but we're using it. It's indispensable. So that I think that that resistance is going to fold. What was the second question? Second part of the question?
In some sectors of that are getting automated, like driving with self-driving cars, etc., are the menial labor tasks, like the typical draftsman, are those going to get phased out as AI technology comes into the architectural profession?
Yeah. Well, actually, everything is. Everything is. I mean, I guess we tend to sort of think in terms of blue collar, white collar, and so on. And we can see factories now, Tesla factories, nobody there. But the point is, the professions themselves are going to be clobbered. Now, I don't know why architects have not been addressing this, but there are books out there, they're bestsellers, and they're telling us the same thing. So it's going to have a huge kind of impact on everything. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. I was going to say something. 1 second. Yeah. So the self-driving car. Okay. The predictions about the self-driving car are, firstly, it's not going to be sudden. It's not going to be something, here's a self-driving car. It's going to incrementally improve until we eventually get the self-driving car. One of the predictions that's been made about the self-driving car by a guy called Toby Walsh, and most things he writes not very interesting, but he makes one really interesting comment about the self-driving car. What's going to happen when self-driving cars are there and humans use them more and more, they will kind of lose their driving skills. They will lose their driving skills, or at least insurance premiums will go up because people who drive manually will be more liable to crash. What's going to happen then, eventually, his prediction, is that people are not going to bother driving. They'll just give up. The young generation won't bother. I mean, even now, I think some people are not buying cars, right? Because they can use Uber or Lyft or whatever. So soon people just will not bother to learn to drive. And the comment he makes is a very brilliant one. He says, and people will not notice or even care. They will not notice or even care. I think that's going to happen to architecture. Now, a self-driving car, what does that mean? You need no driver. If you can say to Alexa, design my building, you don't need an architect. You don't need an architect. And I think there's some things that we assume are going to be there forever. When I was a student back in '88, right, in Cambridge, right, I would go on holiday somewhere. You'd go to a travel agent. You'd sit down in a queue and wait for your turn, and someone would deal with you, and they'd sort out your travel. Then you'd go to a camera shop and you'd buy a film that you'd go and get. And when you came back from holiday, you'd send your films off to be developed somewhere. There are no travel agents. Well, there are a few, but they've gone. There are no camera shops because we've all got these devices that have got cameras on them. And you certainly don't send your films to be developed anymore. All these things have gone and we haven't even noticed it really. That's what's going to happen to architecture. It's going to disappear and we won't notice or even care. That's my prediction. I don't know. I mean, I think that's kind of like, I was talking to my students about this morning about, someone sent me an article in Italian yesterday, and I can speak a bit of Italian, but it came up on my phone, and my Gmail said, "Do you want this translated?" I said, "Yes," and I translated this damn thing, and all of a sudden, bam, it was there. I use WeChat the whole time to my friends in China. It translates really well. It gets increasingly good, right? And my students this morning were saying, do you think we're going to get some app that's going to be able to allow us to talk to our pets? Of course, we're going to be able to talk to pets. Of course, already you get real-time translation where you can talk to, whatever, people in Russia and communicate. So just think through the implications of this. I mean, it's kind of mind-blowing. I mean, one of the thoughts I had, which I want to kind of suggest to you, I mean, we produced all this material, this content, shall we say, from Digital Futures, and we got it on our YouTube thing. We were thinking, why didn't we publish that as a book? And I thought to myself, well, hold on a second. I mean, I've written lots of books. I've got a 40 hours or so out there, but I don't think books have got any future. In fact, what I was speculating with my students this morning is that I don't think writing's got any future. I mean, why do we write? We write because it's kind of code where we're taking voices and we're putting it down in text. Once you're going to say to your computer, Alexa, design my building, you're talking, do you need any rewriting? I mean, I suspect that with facial recognition, with voice recognition and so on, we might even be in a situation whereby we forget how to write just as we'll forget how to drive and just as we'll forget how to be an architect. I don't know. I mean, I'm just speculating. I haven't thought through those questions, but, it's an interesting kind of thought exercise. What is this going to lead to? And what is this going to lead to? I mean, you're architects. You should be thinking about the future. I'm just amazed by how few architects are really thinking about this. I'm just staggered about it. I mean, it's about to hit us. It's going to make almost all of your generation redundant right at the peak of your career. How many schools of architecture are talking about this? How many? I could say probably about 12 around the world, including almost all the schools in China, by the way. No, maybe not. But No, I think it's actually, this is something that if you, as I say, you've got to design your career, and you've got to be aware of the fact that this is on the horizon, for good or for bad.
So in addition to AI, which you're really focused on currently, do you see some other interesting new technologies that we should be learning to bring into firms that we go and work for in the future?
Well, I think that's always been the case. I mean, if you can't use Grasshopper, you're at a real disadvantage these days. But actually, let me just say something, and it's kind of an interesting kind of comment on AI itself, and that's to say, even though technology is getting more and more sophisticated, it's actually getting easier to use. When I was teaching in the Bauhaus, my students we were working with code. We were kind of mail scripting, Rhino scripting, processing, all that kind of stuff. Well, when Grasshopper came along, then suddenly they use these kind of pictorial icons, and it's more straightforward, and it becomes easier, and AI is going to make it easier still. So when you think of something like facial recognition in your camera, which is incredibly sophisticated, it actually makes life easier. It makes life easier. So what's going to happen is actually, this is going to make life more straightforward, and in terms of technologies, it's going to make it easier. I don't know if I can think of anything in particular that I would say apart from AI, and AI is developing the whole time. But I would say one thing, that is that there is a principle that some of you might have heard about called Moore's law. And Moore's law is this kind of exponential increase in terms of the capacity for computers to do things. And what exponential means, as we know from the virus, right? You don't go 1, 2, 3, 4. You go 1, 2, 4, 8, 16. So it can spread. You can really increase, really happen. And that's what's going to happen. In other words, the speed of change is going to increase. So it's really going to have an impact very, very soon on many of the things. So yeah. So I can't think what else is. I mean, yeah. I mean, just one other comment I'd say about AI, and that is that Alan Turing, who was the first person to speculate about, you've probably seen the Imitation Game, right? First person to speculate about AI. He said that AI is probably going to produce things, it's going to be able to compose sonnets, he said. And the problem is that people won't be able to understand them. And I think that's one thing I would say, is that what AI is going to be able to do, we won't even be able to get our heads around, because it's been way beyond the level of we can think at in terms of intelligence. It's going to be beyond human intelligence. At the moment, we can look at AI and sort of joke about it and say it's not as good as us, right? It generates jokes, but the jokes are really bad jokes, right? Now, but the trouble is that we have this kind of view, we judge the world according to our standards. I wrote something for a Harvard journal a couple of years ago where I'm saying we have to go through a second Copernican revolution. The first Copernican revolution was saying that the universe doesn't go around the Earth. We're going around the sun and so on. And I think we've got to really reposition ourselves and realize that we are not the center of the universe in terms of intelligence. There are going to be forms of intelligence we can't even comprehend. It's going to go way beyond what we can even imagine. And that's already happening, right? I mean, typically, I was struck when I was teaching at the AA, there was a review, and there was a student who said, I looked at the possibilities and there's 6. And you think, why 6? It's normally some golden number, or 12 or 10 or 4 or whatever. And the next student came in and said, I looked at the possibilities, I ran them through the computer, and there are 455. And to be honest, most of them are all the same, but here they are. And what this is going to do is to search through alternatives beyond our human biases that will open up other areas. So, I think it's going to really, seen in a positive way, it's going to expand what it is to be human. Seen in a negative way, it's going to put us in our place. And we're going to realize that we are just simply, what we have is human intelligence and human creativity. And there's something out there that's going to be scary. I hope I have scared you, actually. I hope I have scared you, because, yeah.
Is anybody scared?
Just a little.
Yeah.
Robert or Rachel or the rest of the class have anything?
You asked the questions on our list I wanted to hear the answers for already.
Well, I mean, very soon this book's going to be out. I mean, I'm just trying to make sure there are no mistakes. Otherwise, I would give you a copy to read. But very soon that's going to come out, and there's so many other things out there. I would just encourage you to find out about this stuff if you don't know about it already. And there's, there's plenty of, and actually, not only are there these kind of the YouTube library of things where people are talking about this, and there are lots and lots of sessions about it from the Digital Futures, but now companies like Google are making available all their software for free. So it's open source. And if you want to find about anything, just go online. Actually, one of the things I've got to say, I think is going to happen is that the university, that's one of the things that's actually the problem about universities is that we have this notion, and my apologies to Jeff here, but we have this notion that there's a professor who professes, who has all the knowledge. Well, that's not the case anymore. You can find out more online, don't expect Jess to talk about AI. You could find out about that elsewhere. And that's going to be a huge challenge one of the sessions actually, and I put on that list, is the future of education, the future of the university, where basically we're saying, everyone's agreeing that actually what's going to happen in terms of education, we are going to, the material's out there, it's TED Talks and things, it's out there. And what the professor does is simply is a kind of someone who kind of accompanies you on the journey and provokes you and suggests possible readings and so on and things, but doesn't tell you what things are, because those days are gone. So, all sorts of things are going to be changing very soon. And I think with COVID, one of the things that's happened is that we've suddenly begun to realize that what you can do now, which you could do before, right? You could order your groceries online, nobody bothered. Now I get all my groceries online, and it's both, going back to that kind of the LAX experience of boarding a plane, it's both terrifying and exciting in a way. I order from Whole Foods or something, and it said, I'm about to send my order, it said, did you forget this? And I think, holy shit, it knows exactly what I ordered, right? It knows exactly what I've ordered ever since I've ordered anything online, but that's useful. I think, yes, I forgot that. I maybe order some of that, So this is our world, right? This is our world. And COVID has really shaken up the university. It's shaken up lots of different sort of things. And as someone who, just a final comment, because I'm going on too long, but a final comment. We used to have these events in Shanghai every summer where people come fly to Shanghai, and we put on free events. I mean, Akim Menges and all these kind of famous people, Patrick Schumacher would come and run workshops and so on. And then this year we thought, we can't do this. We can't do this at all because no one's, it's no point doing it online. But then I had my review, this was in April, my FIU review, and I had some of my jurors were in China, and I had Gilles Retzin from the Bartlett and London, and I thought, well, this is amazing. I could never normally get them to come to a review, And then the following week I went to Matias del Campo's, I was online, right, in Michigan, and he had 1,000 people following things, live streaming. So we thought, holy shit, we can do this. So we made this event in the summer. It was the biggest ever. I'm sure it's the biggest ever. It's not a question of being big, but we had 12,000 people applying for this thing. We had 80 workshops, and all of a sudden, the digital domain is actually opening up, and the future is here right now. And what I find interesting about teaching is actually I get much better discussions going on in my lectures. I have a 110 student lecture. One of my students said, I feel like I'm in the front row of the lecture, every single lecture. And in the end, we changed it from a 110 person lecture to a 110 person seminar. And it completely transformed our operations. I mean, we couldn't do this before, right? Even this. I mean, so I think that, you're architects, right? You're meant to be imagining the future. Well, things are happening. COVID, AI, and both are game changers. We're not going back to the past, right? We're not going back to a pre-Black Lives Matter, whatever it is. We're now in a new domain. And this is where you should be using your imagination as architects to really imagine that future. What is it going to be like? Are you going to talk to your pets in English? I don't know. What's going to happen? Is writing going to die out? For sure, car driving is going to die out. I'm convinced of that, and I'm pretty sure that architects are kind of vulnerable too. So think about the future. One of my frustrations about architects is that when I was trying to do some research for this book, the only book I could find about the future was somebody published a book about the future of buildings in 100 designs, as though there were going to be some influential buildings that were going to dictate the future of architecture. Who cares? who cares about that? You know, the way that we're operating is it's not about the building designs. It's about a different world entirely. And going back to Digital Futures, Digital Cities at AD that I edited 2009. The first essay was by Patrick Schumacher from Zaha, talking about how the world will be full of parametricism everywhere. Well, that's nonsense, right? But there was an essay at the back by a guy called Ben Bratton and said, what's most important about the digital is how it's changed the way that we navigate and understand our cities. And that's true. We didn't have Uber, we didn't have Lyft. In LA, you can't find your way around without a cell phone these days. So, you know, it's changing because of this technology. And don't think in terms of sexy forms. Think in terms of information technologies. The final chapter of my book is, I call it City Brain, and that's what's going to happen. The city is going to come like a brain. You know, it's going to be, AI is going to be controlling traffic lights and so on, and it's going to be totally different. So the future of the city is not going to be something from Jetsons. It's not going to be flying cars and, you know, high-tech buildings. It's going to be the buildings we have today with a few extra additional ones, but not many. Everything's going to be retrofitted with this technology, and it's going to be a kind of AI landscape. Yeah.
That's a really interesting comment and a good place to wrap it up. But I think that comment, and you people know who you are, but there's a project in the group that I think that last statement may actually speak to. So with that, Neil, I really appreciate you spending this time and sharing your passion with us. And we've all got a lot to get our heads wrapped around. You know, like Neil said, part of what you have to do is to design your future. So think about all of this, absorb all of this, take some time it's going to take some time for you to really grind through what Neil's been talking about. So I encourage you all to do that. Neil, really appreciate it. This has been fantastic.
Yeah, well, I hope it's opened up something to you. But maybe please spread the word. I mean, we're just trying to produce information for you guys, and actually, we're doing it all for free. That's why it's like we don't have a business model. It's kind of like, you know, we managed to make this whole thing happen in the summer for free. People giving their time for free. But anyway, it's there. It's for free. And what we're trying to do now is to do something between a TED Talk and a kind of issue of AD, Architectural Design, which I think is a really good journal. I've edited a few. And we're trying to get a kind of video YouTube version of those online, and they're there. And yeah, so but check it out.
Appreciate you sharing those with us. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So I was meant to talk about space architecture. I didn't realize that, but anyway.
Yeah.
I just want to say one thing just about space architecture. Everyone's talking about going to the moon and Mars. If you go to Mars, you're going to die of radiation, okay? And you're not going to get back. There's a lot of romantic thinking about all this. On the moon, if you're on the surface of the moon for more than 8 hours, you will die of radiation. Without protection, you die of radiation. So there's a lot of romantic thinking about this space architecture. But there is an event on the 14th of November on Digital Futures, which is about, we have a bunch of experts who are architects who are working in the field, talking about space architecture. So 10 o'clock in the morning on the 14th is Saturday. There's a whole thing on space architecture. Someone called Melody Yasser, who's an architect now working for NASA, designing, I think you probably may know her, Ice Igloo. She won the NASA competition. But there's something there. So anyway, enjoy.
Good.
Okay.
Appreciate it, Neil. Thank you.
Thanks, Steph. Okay, bye.
Bye. Okay, whichever team has the video wrap up for this evening, why don't you just stay on for a minute and do your wrap up really quickly?
I'd say my biggest takeaway is that AI could be the death architect. I think that was eye-opening for sure, but I think we're going to start applying these principles into most of our business plans, which could be an interesting difference maker and setting us apart from other people that are maybe doing similar things that we are.
Yeah, I definitely think it's something to implement in future efficiencies with workflows, but I also think that there's an aspect of humanity that you can't replace with AI. So there needs to be some kind of conjunction with how we integrate it within the workforce.
Yeah, I think both of those are really interesting insights, and like you said, it's not going to be immediate, right? There's going to be, I don't know if you call it an evolution or whatever, but it's going to take some time for AI to take over and eliminate architects and things like that. And so one of the things that fascinates me the most about it is, here we are, this is October 14th, 2020. What can you start to do right now or next week or in the next month or a year or whatever as the starting point of that evolution? How can you start to incorporate this? And I think you're exactly right, Jordan. It's whatever your business model is, whatever your idea is for this particular project and beyond, your career beyond, how can you differentiate yourself? Christian said it last week, and as we were wrapping up last week, what can you do to make yourself indispensable, right? And I think that's still part of this same conversation. What do you know about it now? What can you learn about it now? How can you incorporate it into what you're doing now that's going to make you indispensable? Because if you're selling the idea to somebody like me, or you're going to work for someone like me, right? I'm the old guy, right? This is native to you, which is already going to give you a step ahead of me and make you valuable to me. So yeah, I think those are both good insights. Any other thoughts on them?
One thought I had was I was wondering if this is a similar revolution, comparing like the Viollet-le-Duc versus William Morris movement of incorporating industrial aspects versus handcrafted. Maybe that's a style change, or maybe it is more of a practice change. So I feel like both of those were valid at that time. So I wonder if that's how our culture will treat AI. Human design is just as valuable as AI, but I don't know.
I think that's an interesting question, because I think that maybe it's knee-jerk, I think it's natural, but I think the natural reaction is anytime there's anything that happens in the extreme, right? We want to pull back and say, okay, how do we retain some of this other, right? It's about comfort, I think, on some level. Oh my gosh, if we're going to have driverless cars, or if AI is going to start, we're going to start using AI to design buildings, what about historic preservation? What about comfortable things? However that's expressed, I think there's a lot to that that's going to have to play out, because again, Neil says it's going to evolve this way, and we're not going to care that we don't drive anymore. We're not even going to realize that we can't write anymore, read anymore, whatever. But I think there's still going to be that natural resistance until we get to that point. So I think that tension is going to be super interesting.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Great. Any other big takeaways?